right, back to this beast. And to begin with, I started with the status of nations, and we have the Angli becoming a kingdom now in northern Gaul. But, you know, it's something that has to happen if I'm going to make it to Britain. Either that or the association with the Saxons. I think we merged this turn. We'll be able to use the boats to get across. But it doesn't hurt. It gives me some victory points right off the bat before the reinforcement phase. So I don't know what would happen if, like, they were barbarians being merged with a kingdom. I don't even want to think about that. But that was, they were trying to avoid, or they weren't trying to force it. No one else transmitted. Big pile of people at the edge of the chart in double decline. Remember, we have not enough double decline markers on the game. Or not enough decline markers on the game. The Byzantines are in double decline here. Having to use these because kingdoms don't go away. Which is really, you know, a core problem in terms of playability, in terms of the counter mix we see. But it may be necessary to balance out the victory points where red is getting way too many early in the game, and now they're getting negative victory points from all their stuff, which is rather disheartening as the red player, but is how the game handles things. The Gepidae are our first really interesting point. They actually are still eligible to become an empire. They control Moesia, Illyria, Danubius, and Sarmatia. So, and this is why I'm on the video at this point. The three areas, counting barbarian areas as half, do not round up. They get a number of bonuses to their transition to empire. It's basically a positive thing as I see it. For each civilized area beyond the first three, they get +2. Well, what count as the first three? Because Sarmatia and Danubia, you know, are part of my calculation. That would be an interesting question. Like, let's say I had Greece as well. Then would I still be holding, you know, would I be able to count Danubia and Sarmatia as one and then count Greece as a bonus one, getting me 2 victory points or 2 bonuses to that? And I think the answer is yes. But the next thing is for each barbarian area controlled, not above the limit, and I think that's a typo. Maybe that's been reworded in the in the living rules. Who knows? I'm not going to run down and check. But I'm treating it as if these two are a civilized area, and that kind of works. You know, it balances out the points. Since I'm on already, I wanted to catch a little bit up on sort of personal existence or whatever. Today would normally be, this is Sunday, would normally be a shot. I just finished up Leningrad, old SPI game. If you want to take a look at some of that. But taking those little breaks is really helping me come back to this. I don't know why. It just, you know, continuing with this was really hurting me, and I'm a little bit more positive as long as I don't have to just play this straight through. Yeah, that happens with longer games, but this one I have a lot of negative feelings towards so far. It doesn't mean I won't tackle it again, because I'm stupid that way. But yeah, in terms of personal stuff, I've been, you know, I went dancing on Friday. Saturday was a hard to recover day, but I finished up my Leningrad. Actually got quite a bit of time in on that, considering, you know, that it's not a very long game, but I was afraid that that would stretch out into today with how lethargic I felt after the drinking and dancing. Today I should be going shopping, but my wife's starting to have some physical problems, and we decided not to today. I could have done it on my own. I'm the important part. I'm the one who pulls the cart, but her company is helpful in motivating me and I think we can survive a week, especially since there's a closer supermarket that we can load up on some weird shit from. But anyway, yeah, so that's why I'm doing any of this today. I might actually be able to make it through a turn because this is a non-victory point turn. All right, let's keep going. I was doing this right with the Romans. So you don't generate the negative victory point penalty with empires when they reach the edge of their age. If they're on the doubled side in the age, again, a kingdom checks for transition for empire, okay. And then they lose the victory points according to the penciled in stuff from the living rolls, which probably, I don't know, if they fail. And the empire applies the expense to its treasury, possibly triggering a bankruptcy. So this negative 10 happens not just during the income phase, but it happens if you're at the edge of your age. And so I think I was doing that with the Romans. I might have screwed up, like given the Byzantines some negative to begin last turn. I'm not sure. But whatever, we'll just leave things as they are. Brain farts sometimes when I'm trying to think of something that I wanted to say. Comes the same way when I have to look up rules and then I forget what the fuck I'm looking up. And when you got something that's as much of a mess as this game, that's liable to happen to me. And I've just had that happen where, you know, I was putting the various raiders down, figuring out, you know, who's going to go, and moving my way down the turn chart. The Anglo-Saxon merge, I was going to look that up, but something else kicked into my head, and I don't fucking remember what it was. I mean, this isn't terribly helpful, but it's to show you some of the struggles that, you know, I'm having with the game. I thought I had just thunk something up. You know what? I think I know what it is. I wanted to look up the control of areas because I'm a little worried about the Gepidae controlling Sarmatia still. And so, yeah, that was where I was going to go. But again, you know, it's so fucking hard to remember. So I think the ruling thing here is this idea that civilized nations don't lose control of an area. Now, it seems a little weird to me to be able to maintain control over a barbarian area. So I may have not written that as well. It may be civilized areas don't lose control of civilized nations don't lose control of civilized areas. And that's, I think I do have to go look that sucker up to see how it's worded now in the living rolls. This was me scratching notes off of the change log. You know, such massive changes to this game that it's just painful. Of the living rolls that I have doesn't change the nature of that. I think it's a little weird, to tell you the truth. So here's the thing. You know, the Gepidae grabbed control of all this. This is a barbarian unformed area. It doesn't have cities or anything like that, which sort of provide a structural control over the area. And no, this isn't part of it, because a second city hasn't been built yet, which is also in the errata, of course. This is part of Moesia. But, you know, there's nothing here, and there's a Byzantine unit in there. And somebody has walked through it, but never at any point has the half the provinces thing been taken away from the Gepidae. So they've never lost control over it. So somehow this large area is just vaguely controlled, and that doesn't really suit my feelings as to sort of the barbarian areas of the time. My feeling is that you would need some sort of garrison to keep control of it. But anyway, that's what the rules are, and it's, you know, it's impossible to change this thing on the fly. Now here's the Anglo-Saxons. They unite. They're a single nation. activating in the Angle time slot. Okay. The treasuries merge. Use the Angle treasury marker. Keep the higher of the two nation statuses. Well, see, now this is the weird thing. The Angle time slot is related to this nation status, but okay. So I think the Angle marker replaces the Saxon there. Nope, you average the, higher of the statuses. Statuses is the kingdom, so they're both kingdoms, that's fine. You average the ages, treating a newly promoted to kingdom as age 1 using the Angle age marker. Okay, so we have an average of 5, or we have 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. That puts us to an age of 3. I think this goes away. I think we combine their treasuries. If I can find them. The Saxons have 13. Where are the Angles? The Angles have huge amounts because they just got promoted. So 29, they're at the top of their game. I don't like this. Pick a capital if 2 exist. Well, that's going to be the Saxon capital. We definitely don't want the Angle capital as our capital. An existing alliance is broadened, a fetus or clientele remains in force, but a vassalage is lifted. What's a vassalage? That's the submitted? You know, using different terms. And I don't know if this is just my fault. Vassal mercenary, but it's a submitted nation. Yeah, it's the same thing. Okay, so I don't think that there's any vassalage here, but here's the problem. The Saxons are vassals. So what are they talking about? A vassalage unless both share the same suzerain. So that sounds almost to me like they would keep any of their vassals, but the Saxons are no longer vassals to the Britons because they've added this Anglo-Saxon to things. I think that's the intention. When scoring victory points, add the individual nation scores together and award half to each the Anglo and Saxon controlling players. Boy, do I hate that. That's going to be fucking obnoxious. But yeah, so I think the Angle capital goes away, although the city they just created stays, but they lose that larger size that they get up their cap. Yes, this is all one fucked up game. And I am going to put their pieces together so that I know they're all one kingdom now. For whatever that matters. Okay, well, and how am I going to remember that there's 2 countries? Yeah, I don't know. Now I also look at these. The Heruli are 13. The Angles are 17. The next one down is the Epithalates, which I think are 15. And the Averum, which I think are higher, but I don't see them. Crap. No, the Jutes. Averum is the name, is the word for age. Are 19, so I think we go before the Jutes in this order. Right then. Reinforcements, a couple of weird cases that show up. First of all, the Scots don't have any reinforcements specific to them. Now they get the default 1 barbarian or whatever. But it's kind of strange that like the Huns, who couldn't possibly get reinforcements, kept getting them until here. They couldn't possibly get barbarian reinforcements at that point. But there's no specification for the Scots. When most of these kingdoms are being led, like Burgundians, there's almost no chance there's going to still be around as barbarians, but they've got their one unit and their leader listed. So that seems a little weird to me. I don't know if the Scots come in later. It might happen. But the really odd stuff that is... the Avars get their invasion now. Now, the reason their horde didn't move is because they didn't have an invasion, but they needed to get all kinds of places on their victory point turn. And by my interpretation, they can't move their horde if they're going to use their campaigns. Again, I don't know if that's what's meant, but that meant they're still in Siracis, so they got displaced with all their reinforcements coming in. By the Khazar. I have no clue what the Khazar want. Are they the last of my races? Nope, I still got Vikings coming. Not a lot of turns left. The Khazar are interested in being in the Caucasus or Scythia. Great. And I will have to look to see what they want to be. But they want to be down in here. That's fine. They're not going to interfere much with the Avars, so that's okay. And they bumped them a little further across. Whew, so that puts me, time to take a break, on the event stage. And yeah, I mean, I cannot face, dealing with this game in more than little tiny bites anymore. Okay, we got an additional one event card here for the blue player that's very, very valuable. Unfortunately, I can't play it now, which pisses me off because I won't remember it. It reduces age between 1 and 3 spaces, your choice. Well, okay, on the age chart. Now, since I can't play it now, I'll just toss it back. I thought I was going to be able to play it at this point, and there was a discontinuity based on that, but given that it can't be played until the status phase, yeah, that makes sense. But I'm going to have a tough choice between the Burgundians and the Ostrogoths. The Burgundians are currently costing me victory points. The Ostrogoths, it gives 5 more units. It gives all kind of cool shit to you. Of course, you have to pay the maintenance on those units, which could be a problem conceivably. But yeah, I mean, this might be enough power to send the Burgundians to take over an area. On the other hand, it might be enough to rejuvenate the Ostrogoths to retake Italy, because they have it right now, I think, but by a bare margin, really. It's really problematic, though, because there's no way I check events during the Status of Nations phase. So if I'm lucky, I'll be checking it during the next events phase and say, oh, I should have done this, and then do it then. But whatever. I can understand why there needs to be a delay. Maybe not. I mean, why can't you just draw it and use it? I don't know. I don't have a good clue on that. The Goths got themselves this treaty card, and they're going to play it right away because they have a nice advantage for it if it doesn't bankrupt them. It is kind of painful, but they're going to spend $5 and give it to the Alans to take this space. They actually have a non-aggression pact with the Alans, and these guys have nowhere they can retreat to legitimately, so they're just destroyed, which is a pretty potent factor in this. It gets me a space. I couldn't use it on these Romans here because they have a capital. Using it on the Suebi, not terribly useful. I'd just be booting them around. Well, I don't know. With a non-aggression pact, they might not be able to retreat either. Hold on. Yeah, I can do it to the Suebi, which is even more valuable to me. So let me give these here, because the Suebi have nowhere to retreat to. This is Visigoth territory right now. So that actually destroys the Suebi army instead. And I'll move that money from the Alains over to the Suebi. Is this reasonable? I don't know. See, the thing is, if my capital was in Hispania, I would probably be connected to it. But since I'm not, I've just been knocked back to nothingness. And I don't really have to worry about the non-aggression pact part of it because the Swabi aren't going to be able to get there. So I can throw that card into the discard pile. That's an important factor because otherwise this card would have to like somehow be used. There might be a treaty marker in here, but that would just confuse things because there aren't enough of other markers, so I'm using them to indicate subjugations. Again, the game does not have the amount of counters and enough information on them to give you all the information. So basically, something that I used to do with EU as well is probably, rather than trying to remember things or use the counters involved in the game, you have to keep track of some kind of log of all the events that have happened in the game, etc., and constantly refer to it. And part of the problem with that is devising a way that works, you know. The fact that there's a treaty relationship and which way it goes and everything is just a weird thing to do. These diplomacy cards, because money is so rare at this point for the most part, are just cards that are saying, hey, I get $1 for each of these. And they're all over the place because there are a lot of leaders who have diplomacy capability. But actually using them for the diplomacy is pretty fucking expensive. I mean, even the Visigoth one, that cost $5. Most countries couldn't afford that, and I'm taking a risk by playing it. Of course, I wiped out the Swebi to do so. And do I want to move this one? I don't know. I think he's safe there. But yeah, I mean, wiping out a nation's existence seems like I mean, it essentially is. They're back up here now with no capability to expand. The hope had always been that they would be able to get a kingdom down here, but their kingdom was formed here, and then until and unless this was captured, and they had to have territories down here that would prevent them from submitting, they were going to keep their capital way up there in the Frankish area where it's just exposed permanently, even if the Franks were thrown into a position where they couldn't have subjugated nations. And what the hell is this? This is the Arabs, who I think come in again on turn 12. So that was diplomacy, and that puts us to the administrative phase. And again, I just don't have the will to keep going. You know? It's just so fucking easy to be like, yeah, this is just too painful. There's too many annoying little pieces that I can't get to where the game is sort of enjoyable, which is, you know, playing the kind of Britannia style game. Not that I love Britannia that much, but that's the part that's kind of easy, even though the military can be expensive, and even that dies out and becomes unpleasant once you hit here. Now, I gotta say, most of the nations, their economic phase, their administrative phase, is pretty fucking easy. It's, oh look, I lose a bunch of victory points at this point in the game, but even knowing that it's going to be fairly easy, it's still not pleasant looking forward to, at least moving the troops around. The countries that I'm skipping aren't losing victory points automatically or whatever. And I'm back. And one of the things I forgot is the tedium of all these civilized kingdoms in the administrative phase. You know, I thought, oh, it'll be easy. They can't do anything. That's not entirely true. Each one of them, I have to reshuffle this deck, pull a number of cards, choose the cheapest card, make them bankrupt, which drops them 10 victory points because it's too aging, and then allocate the card, which will probably cause more victory point loss, and then do nothing, you know. So there's a lot of mechanical crap going on that's just disheartening. Disheartening. Yeah, sometimes I add things to words. And it's just for no purpose. Some of it, you know, I wish to a large extent, I wish these cards could just be a chart. Maybe a multifaceted chart, so you could have more results come out of it without, you know, I don't know, without having to reshuffle for every damn country. It would be easier to do a lookup on a chart than all this reshuffling, but anyway. And certainly than the complaining that it engenders when I pick up the camera to talk about it. Sort of the level of excitement you might get. The Persians ended up with kind of a lucky draw. They still lost 20 victory points this turn, which is sort of the standard once you get to this point. But they've got $5, actually $6 left over at the end of their economic phase because, you know, good money came from their card plus their income and everything. And they have no unit. So they might be able to avoid some of the penalties next turn. They'll still lose 10, 15 victory points probably, but, well, probably 10, maybe 20, you know, depends on what they get as options on their cards. If they get a passive, they might get away with just a 10-point hit. The Alemanni also took the 20-point hit, but they had a couple bucks left over at the end, so they bought an infantry unit in the hopes that they can capture something, you know. I don't know what, maybe a Burgundian territory. I mean, really they want to lose that unit if they can't capture a territory, but the $2 isn't going to help them. They're going to have to pay 5 no matter what next turn. They could also maybe pillage something and get a few more bucks and save themselves from some of that 20-point loss per turn that they're going to just take. A draw for the Ostrogoths threw them into somewhat worse position. They can still maintain their army, but their cash reserves have kind of drained up. And remember, I could have played, or I have a card that I wasn't allowed to play this turn because for whatever reason, you know, hey, this card can only be played at the beginning of the turn, and therefore you have to wait a turn before you get it. I can cope with that. The Suebi actually had a fair amount of cash, their army having been dissolved. So they built up another little force to try to make it to Spain. And, you know, it's kind of the best I can do. I'm not allowed to attack the Franks, although there are some spaces on my way to Spain, so maybe I could, you know, get to an income that I can sustain myself. I still got $10 left. Unfortunately, so the biggest hit on the Ostrogoths was they got 2 age off their card. The Suebi also got an age off their card. This is the thing, like, your age is not the turns. You're really unlikely to get away for free in terms of age unless you have a lot of money and can buy can buy a reform card. And even then, it's not guaranteed. You might get some minus age off a reform card, but now we're at the Gepidaes, and this is where things start getting complicated. Them, the Vandals, the Visigoths are kind of harder countries to do, and then the Epithet. So I'm gonna stop again for a little while. It's just so fucking hard to bring myself to care to play. I do want to finish this up, see what insights I have, and I don't know, maybe give it another crack at some point in the near future. Not on video again, but just to see if I can get this to kind of work, and maybe with one of the 2 expansions. They don't work together, unfortunately, which is another thing that kind of pisses me off. It's like, well, then which one do I want to do? After some fairly reasonable turns for the Gepidae, the Vandals, and the Visigoths, not great. The Vandals and Visigoths both lost their leader, but, you know, they're proceeding okay, gaining some age, though. The Alani had a usurper event come up with, not a bad event otherwise, so they're actually at plus 10 money at the end of the turn, but then they took the usurper thing, and the question here comes down to, Did I want to build units? Well, they can't help me attack Spain, but they could have helped me avoid the usurper event. And Spain is what, and the reason they can't help me attack Spain is I'm kind of cut off by these Visigoths here, which I'll lay siege to again and fail again probably. But I mean, my goal is to get into Spain and try to gain some victory points. But I think more important than that is not to lose victory points, right? My big victory points right now are coming off the Vandals and Gepidae. And I just don't want to create a point sink when I probably cannot gain very much against the Visigoths here. So my big intention is, don't go bankrupt, don't age too quickly. I probably won't, because I'm a late, I turned into a civilized country late, and just go with what I can. And so I didn't spend on any additional units. I ended up degrading, I succeeded in the usurpation and ended up degrading my elite unit there. And now, somewhere I ought to probably mark down that he's been usurped so that I remember in case I want the dynastic stability thing. Although no usurpation happened, so I think none was successful is good enough. I'm not sure. I really don't know. Yep. And then we go on to people like the Harry Lai, who are not in great shape here. But these are a little wealthier and probably won't end up being point sinks. With the exception in terms of that overall diagnostic is these Epithalates, who are in pretty good shape overall, actually. And maybe the Angles are now, the Anglo-Saxon combined, although why they'd be merged with one of them on the Norman coast and one of them in Britain, I have no idea. Would kind of make sense if there was like, marriage effects or something that could cause temporary mergers of countries. But no, that card doesn't impact this, and nobody would play it because it costs money and doesn't do you any good. And my albino turkey is back. There he is. Look at how white he is. I'm assuming it's albinoism. Oh, we got some little ones over here too. They're not very old. Neat. Just always impressed by how odd it looks compared to the others. And there are the little ones again. They're not tiny, but it's always neat to see the turkeys come around. The deer, I had deer today too. The color looks really yellow now. Weird. Oh, there it seems to be improving. That's kind of the effect the other camera gives all the time. Anyway, after that little interlude, and that may be why I changed lighting. I went outside and did it, and then came in here. This may just be able to set lighting better. Maybe I can set some setting on that other camera to say, hey, bad indoor lighting. The Harelai actually blew the $20 instead of the 5 on a passive to get a reform. Now, which is better? Hard to tell. Breach of alliance doesn't matter at all. Intolerance didn't matter for them either. Well, see here it says all alliances with nations of different religions are immediately broken. I don't know what that means. Alliance, sometimes the breach of alliance, your nation will breach all of its alliances. You may not make any new. Fetuses and submitted nations are not affected by this card. That's not specified here. But alliance is also a specific type, if I recall correctly. Alliance is one type of thing that can happen from a diplomacy. What are they talking about? Is it just the alliances here? This one seems to imply something different. I don't know. I'm going to let it not have any effect on their submitted nature. That doesn't, however intolerant they are, that doesn't seem to make them less submitted, but maybe it would. But yeah, I lost my leader which is a shame. Other than that, there's not a lot I can do, but I was able to reduce my age, which for a number of nations might be good. Unfortunately, most nations, like if you're not a new kingdom, a fairly new kingdom like the Hurley are, nations don't have that kind of cash on hand unless they're like the Vandals or something that's really cranked itself up to nearly empire status. And of course, once it breaches the empire level, it probably doesn't have enough either. You know, sure, the Romans at the beginning of the game did. One funny thing about the difference, and I may have mentioned this already, early in the game, the administrative section didn't take too much. There were 3 countries that had to undergo it. It wasn't trivial, but especially when I was keeping it as a changelog for the first couple turns, it worked easily enough. And then it got really, really frustrating because they were big and the changelog became too complicated. By the way, I'm using these as decline markers now because, I don't know, whatever. Those are double declines. I was running out of too many. I needed another one for the Visigoths here. And that's part of what didn't go well for them. But yeah, now the administrative section with all these kingdoms is really painful. But before, the military section was kind of painful. We had, you know, multiple leaders in the Byzantines and the Persians especially, but also the Western Romans, able to interact again and again and again. And now things tend to be in such decline that the leaders are almost never able to do anything because I just don't have the kind of cash that I had at the beginning to be able to spend on the initial chits. Now, of course, you know, for the Byzantines, they're still fairly wealthy, but they're so old that because they're Roman and they're old, they suffer a penalty that other old empires will not suffer for whatever reason. There's also this weirdness, something else I noted. So like in the usurper thing, it's written for the Romans. It talks about per elite unit designated as loyal to the nation's player, per auxiliary unit likewise designated. Nothing about regular units, right? So could I designate a regular unit? I don't know. I didn't do that. But, you know, again, I would assume that given that usurpation can affect kingdoms and that other countries can become empires as well, that, you know, it's written a little in a way that you're left, again, making up rules, or maybe it's in the living rules replacement for the calamities book or something. It's kind of weird because when you open up the living rules, I don't think that includes all the appendices. But the other the changelog thing did. Maybe the appendices are all clumped together somewhere else, or maybe they're hidden in that rules and I just, you know, don't notice it because it's such a fucking big thing. That all I ever do is search for keywords and see where they come up. But I don't remember coming up in the calamities, for example. All right, we're still working our way through. Oh yay, my favorite event, the catastrophic fire, which again, I don't know if this can impact, you know, half the time capitals. Certainly if they're higher than level 1 base because they get the +1. But it's just such a fucked up thing in so many ways. It was perhaps a mistake. I could have gotten... This is on the epithalames, so I don't know. My leader is not terribly valuable to me, but I figured, well, I didn't want to drain my money completely with a 20-point card, and my choices were 10 or 20. I'm like, okay, whatever. Weird thing that happened, because the Angles combined with the Saxons, now they just created the city this turn, and it became a level 2 city, and then it dropped down to a level 1 anyway because their capital went away. And I don't know if that's right or not. Again, you know, all this crap that you got to kind of make decisions on. In the game, basically, there's just not rules support for this stuff. 29 cities, and when you know it, I rolled a 30 on my first roll, which was, you know, easy enough to cope with. But then I ended up with one of these two cities. Can't be sure, so I rolled randomly between them because, you know, trying to count to 30 swinging all over the map is not trivial. But a bunch of, you know, 1 to 100 counters or 1 to 30 counters even for now. I could have had those laid down. But I don't have a set like that easily available. I'm not sure. I don't think I have a set of that nature. Like Titan, you know, goes, it starts jumping once you get to large numbers, but I could set up 2-digit markers next to everything, whatever, but that would be a lot of work. So anyway, it hit Constantinople, and luckily for me, it was the type that actually has an effect, a pillage marker, instead of destroying the city, which couldn't have any effect at all. So, yay. And going over to the idea of the angles, one of the problems I have, their kings are the same, but whether or not they get to keep 2 kings, I would say no. Given that, though, I spent a lot of money to get a boat because my elite units are here. That can be possibly problematic because it means we gotta probably fight the Jutes to make our way across, but that's life. The other option was not to build up my elites, to leave my pieces here as their own and build up more pieces and try to fight from Britain. I don't feel like I'm as likely to succeed with that. But it's hard to tell because this has a risky naval operation to undergo. I got a kind of crappy roll, which cut away like $15 of treasury. So that was painful. They didn't have to pay this 5. That's only for empires, but the passive would have been worse, perhaps. I don't know. Age doesn't matter that much for these kingdoms, so I don't know. You know, it's this odd situation again where like kingdoms who are up here really don't want age. And you get about here, yeah, at 2 age, that's going to start costing me victory points, perhaps. But back here, it wouldn't have hurt that much. But overall, this would be a worse card in general. I don't know so much, though. His leader isn't very good. And losing $3 would have been a lot better than losing 15. I would have been able to build quite an army and perhaps, you know, take over Britain with the combined forces. Really weird is, you know, like you get victory points that are specific per nation. So like the Saxons get 10 victory points for all of Britain at the end of the game. The Angles get half the total Anglo-Saxon victory points. It's specified on the Angles. It's not specified correctly on the Saxons, is it? No, it is. Yeah. So they total up their victory points each. Now, if they're both getting 10 points for all of Britain, then they're each getting 10 points for all of Britain also. So I don't know what's going on. I also don't know who controls them. Do blue and green have to agree? Does blue control the blue pieces and green control the green pieces? None of that's specified. Neat, eh? Finish up with the Jutsu. Probably got the better card for them. They get their leader. They'll go up 2 age, but who cares? We're close to the end of the game and we're fairly far down. But we didn't have a lot of troops, so like we weren't able to build a lot. We do still have our navy and some cash. The counter, this is so confusing because the Jute counter on the back, it's got the Gepide, and the Gepide has the Jute. Again, a misprint. I should probably mark those up in such a way that I can tell the difference. That almost gets us to the end of the economic shit. I forgot, I got the big one left. Geez, maybe close to time for dinner, so I think we're taking a break for here, and we'll do the Byzantines last. Okay, so we had a series of events for the Byzantines. Their card draw, they had the money for it, but it was just this. But that extra age drives it into having to pay this immediately, and they were down to 5, so they hit a bankruptcy. Bankruptcy can end the game. First thing they got was an event. They've got the sedition that'll come place after they build units. However, it is a calamity on their books, which works out for this. Now, they had +3, +5, +6 for the calamities, and they had 5 other areas. They rolled low enough that they're not impacted, so they do not collapse. However, that ends up working out. They're still here, but they've got some bad shit happening on their watch. And we built some units back. I think I got the cash right. Not a lot of money left. $21. That's not great for an empire. But I kind of screwed up at the end and forgot about their penalty for this. I had them at 31 before, but they paid off all their elite units that were left. One gets damaged initially, and more or less ended up in a acceptable condition. But they're going to have more trouble with the Vandals or being able to expand into Italy. We may be able to shift our boats to be able to work our way down. Problems with the way the game kind of plays out with these administrative cards is you end up losing, leaders like Mauritius here, who are pretty good leaders militarily, because they don't have the administrative capability. And my feeling is that the historical value of his leadership, +2 units, 3 extra campaigns, 2 extra combat value, all of that is based on the idea that he probably did pretty good kick-ass military stuff, but he doesn't have the administrative capability to make any insurance that he can, continue, that he can get those values, right? He's got kind of a low administrative. Sure, it gets him an extra draw, 3 cards, but 3 cards doesn't give you much opportunity, especially, given the fact that at this point in the game, there is no way you're going to get a reform capability. You might be able to get military, and he could have picked, his choices were between passive and reform. So, but if he got a military, sure, there's a better chance that he'd have his leadership ability there. And you can factor that into your choices. But again, you're more likely to collapse if you pick military, or as likely to collapse, and it's going to drain your cash flow. So there's some definite trade-offs there that players may not want to make to get a hold of this good military leader. On the other hand, not playing him is kind of a painful thing. And then the leaders who maybe failed their administrative checks historically don't have good military ratings, and they don't have good administrative checks either. It's only a few really super-powered leaders like Justinian or someone like that who get ratings that allow them to more or less ensure that they can both do the military and I don't know if Justinian's a good example of that, because he has the named leaders under him, if I recall correctly. So he may not actually have a good military rating, but he has a good administrative rating. But yeah, the chance of getting one of your good military leaders to be actually active is lower than you would think. Lower than, historically these leaders were active, and leaders who were not historically active militarily they might be okay militarily. They might give you some advantages, so that, you know, you might get lucky with one of them and get something that's okay, but you're not going to get, you know, it's not like you're constantly getting leaders like Marcius here, where it's just a question of, did you get a good, you know, did you get somebody who's capable, did they get lucky with their administration and therefore get to use their military ability, or did they just sit on the throne, you know? Anyway, that should move us to the military stage. Bards had a pretty good turn. They tried to attack up here against the Alains and failed, but they also swept down against the Ostrogoths, captured their capital, knocking it to next turn, and then attacked them, failed to completely destroy them, which would have resulted in a submission, which would be great. But in all this movement, the Ostrogoths lost Italy, and now no one controls Italy, but there's a horde there. And that is sufficient, I believe, for a barbarian to own it. I hope I'm right. It doesn't really matter, but except in terms of what my decisions were. Barbarians control an area of the only hordes present are theirs, their allies, or their vassals. There are no other hordes in Italy right now, so boom, we get it. Because no one else has claim to it. It doesn't matter, you know, Italy could be completely controlled by other players. They could have just one space with a horde in it, and they would get it. Which is just weird. But whatever. And in getting it, you know, they get Rome and they get Campania, and that's about it. They already had Liguria. They moved back there. They needed that to gain it. Then after that, they submitted the briefly unsubmitted Heruli, and now have a unit of the Herulis under their own command. The Ostrogoths have lost theirs somewhere along the line. And yeah, so the Lombards are in a good position now to convert to a civilized nation and possibly just become Christian and get all kind of victory points for that, because their income's actually going to be pretty decent now. And the Ostrogoths, I hope I said the Lombards first, the Ostrogoths are in a kind of piss poor position, with the Byzantines thinking again about invasions into Italy. Of course, the Lombards are now the bigger problem. I'm having trouble finding, and I don't know if I ever did, the rules on a kingdom getting its capital back. Somewhere or another it says it can be redeployed into another city, but I'm not sure what happens if the kingdom loses its other city, right? In this case, the Ostrogoths only have one remaining city. If they do lose that, they won't be able to get their capital back, and it might be a way that a kingdom can disappear. I'm not sure. That would seem like a kind of gamey way to get rid of the point loss of a bad kingdom if that happens. And it's not possible if your kingdom isn't big when the capital falls and then all other cities are taken in between. So it feels like a cheat if that's the case. You know, it just feels like a really odd circumstance. So I don't think that's going to happen. I think what happens is this just floats around. But again, I couldn't find the actual rule on it, and it doesn't seem that important to look for. I'm pretty sure there's nothing that says the kingdom is just destroyed. You know? So then you're left with, well, make up your own rules for it, and probably the best thing is the kingdom remains without a capital for a little while, for another turn or whatever, until it has one. And it may be explicitly saying that. Dots have lots of pieces, but nothing to do with them. Yeah, I could go beat up on stuff, I guess. I get points for killing stuff. Probably worthwhile, just to grab some extra points and to try to limit the Saxons' capability, because they and the Anglo countermix could be very deadly, and the Jutes are being helped by my Scots, so we'll do that. Turned out maybe not too good. We got a couple points off of it. We gave a point each to the Anglos and Saxons, I guess, because they supposedly split their points. But And we didn't kill off many units and just didn't do anything that impressive. And the Gepidae managed to largely rebuff the Avar attack. I've got them up here in Danubis still, but we're actually still at 3 areas, and well, 4 areas, but 3 for Empire. And we'll see how long that continues, if it does. Arians pretty much had nothing to do. If the Gepidae or someone had something nearby we could grab easily, we could have taken a shot at the Lombard horde and tried to subjugate them, but chances are they would intercept, and that wouldn't go well. What we really want to do is weaken the Gepidae, and our main goal, victory point wise, is to keep controlling Germania, which we've got right now. So, right? Maybe not. Yeah, our horde is in Germania, so yes, we do, and that's worth a whole bunch of points, along with the stuff we got points for last time. So we're pretty much just sit there, kind of like the Scots. It doesn't really matter. We just park, and nobody cares about us. We don't care about anybody. And the Khazar came down. Oops, forgot to roll that siege. It's not very likely. And we'll fall back here. Khazar came down. They now have control of Sarmatia. They had enough territories to take it away from the Gepidae, and they have their horde parked there. So they're in good shape, and they wiped out the Colchis. Assuming that these minor kingdoms can be wiped out, which is a big if. It doesn't make much difference to us if we could subjugate them. That would be fine. We would get the extra unit. We'd get the victory points. We're not looking at getting a kingdom particularly for the Khazar. Yes, we do want the 10 points. So if we age enough, which we should, unless something weird happens, I don't know, it's possible an event or something could hit us and reduce us, but we should have the option to turn into a kingdom at the end and get 10 victory points for that as well. All right, that puts us over to the civilized kingdoms, and there's a whole bunch of them. Franks launched a couple of sieges, one against Liger, and then with their king, 2 here against Burgundy. And you might say, well, what about the Burgundians? Wouldn't they intercept? If they do, they lose this territory, and they probably lose the battle. So it was like, let's just try to see if we can survive the siege, and they did. So that's that. Franks did not increase their territory at all, and we go on to the Burgundians, who probably can't do shit either. The Alemanni used their extra unit to slide into the Alps for whatever that's worth, which is just about nothing. They can't attack the Franks. They're kind of too weak to do much against the Alemanni, although they could have sieged the Alemanni and taken them as a subject nation. They they might have been intercepted if they did that, because they were weaker. But that would mean the Burgundians giving up this territory. Of course, they could move back in during their own turn. To show kind of the absurdity of the whole situation, the Burgundians can't do anything because they have to keep a unit here in order to keep control of that. If they were bigger, they wouldn't need garrisons. But you don't have control of an area, you need to garrison all the provinces within it that you want to own. So, whatever I move from, I'd lose. And the problem is there's a city here. I can't just regain that territory. Even if it wasn't walled, you still have to maintain a garrison in that city in order to keep it. And I don't have, I barely have the money to keep that unit. So, Ostrogoths try to take the Campania. They're intercepted by the Lombards, who own Italy now, and are beaten back, but at some cost. In fact, the Lombards, the Ostrogoths got more points than the Lombards off that fight, but they were wiped out. So there you have it. Oh, to the poor Swebby. Looks like they don't have an easy way through, except they can try to subjugate the Burgundians. And the Gepidae had a pretty exciting turn. They open. I probably screwed up. They opened things up by, give them an extra action on their leader. Oh well. it didn't help them. They opened things up by submitting the Avars, which is pretty cool. And in fact, I forgot to give them the money from the Avars, which I'll do in a moment. But then they went and attacked Constantinople, defeated the army the first time. And here's where I cheated. I went in a second time, and they were defeated. But they needed 10s to successfully siege it. And even that, they're kind of lucky that they needed that with that 4-wall and naval support and everything. It's pretty painful. They actually had a chit that helped them in the first combat. And then they rolled tremendous and just wiped the Byzantine army out without taking losses. But the second time, it was a fairer battle. They also grabbed Sarmatia back. The Khazars killed them here, but there's only so many places you can intercept them. That's it. Just a matter of like, I only got one leader, and they can spread all over and grab shit. And yeah, I mean, something like this could, but it didn't. So we're still in a position where we can become an empire. I don't know how big a deal it is. We're probably not going to make it to the end, but becoming an empire becomes kind of cool. It changes the economic flavor. You make less income, but you don't have to pay maintenance on all your units, and they got a bunch of units on the board right now still. Although less than they did. They got a pile of dead now. Let's took an attack on the Byzantines all across the front. However, they were defeated in these two battles, and where they won, they failed the siege. So, no gains there. Goths shifted a lot of their forces up in case the Alans want to try to break in, which of course they do, but... They attacked, basically just generated victory points for themselves and the Visigoths. They lost the battle. They also failed to siege here, which would have helped them, presumably, by subjugating those and allowing them to pass through. And we're getting towards the end of the line other than the Byzantines. The Jutes. Kind of interesting thing here. I guess it's conceivable if there's an empire in Britain, but the Jutes get a bonus of victory points for having at least 6 provinces in Britannia. There are only 11 provinces in Britannia, which means 6 of them gives you control of Britannia. But there's one possibility, well, there's a couple of possibilities that could counteract that. Trying to think. Yeah, I can only think of one, which is if there's an empire that has control of Britannia due to the cities, you wouldn't have control as a kingdom or a barbarian. But otherwise, having the majority of provinces would give you control. Anyway, they took their turn and wiped out a bunch of the Saxons, including the capital. That was an Anglo capital. And now the Angles are going to be down here. This was the cost, maybe, to setting up my king down there. And the Angles are going to try to get themselves into Britannia, I guess. Philates took the last territory that they cared about. That's kind of painful because the Byzantines want all of Mesopotamia. They get a big victory point bonus for that. But they just did not have the forces to respond. And this is kind of the problem. They're militarily no longer effective. Remember, they have limitations on what they can build up. So even though they had a decent amount of cash, they couldn't throw a bunch of garbage on the board. The Angles successfully made a crossing, and they sacrificed a couple of units on the siege, but they failed. And now they have nowhere they're allowed to retreat to. So the Anglo army is destroyed. I really wanted to get them across. So, because without them over there, they're not going to, the Saxon points or the combined Anglo-Saxon points are just going to be shit. So that Jute Navy has done its job all game. It actually didn't intercept, so it failed to. But yeah. painful. Heruli went from being subjects of the Italian Ostrogoths to subjects of the Italian Lombards. They have nowhere they could really go. I mean, I guess I could attack an Ostrogoth. How fucked am I? I'm not in decline, so I probably do not want to do that. I want to let this play out, and we'll let it get to the Byzantines to end the turn out. Hey, we're doing pretty good. And the Byzantines tried to launch a naval expedition to Africa, figuring that'll take some of the pressure on the Vandals off. Unfortunately, they don't have someone on this coastline that's adjacent to the last sea they traveled through, so yeah, they did not make it. And had they made it, there would be perhaps a battle with the Vandal Navy, although they had the edge on that. Because it was the Angles who have a naval warfare card. I don't know if the Byzantines do, they might too. Ooh. Shit. I think I could have made it. Oh fuck. Well, that's the cost of event cards, right? You don't see them. I don't want to undo it. So that's the end of the turn. And we got the Vikings coming in. Let me calculate out the points for this turn just to show you. It's not a victory point turn, but we can see what comes out of it. What kind of negatives in play? The pink player got negative 44 points total. Green got -6. Yellow scores big with 7. Big -20 for Persia in there. And blue gets a big 1. They're -20 over here on the Burgundians. So, I mean, it's not like everybody's catching up with the red player anyway. Granted, there was a little bit of cheating, or mistakes in their favor. There's no question about that. But I don't think... I kind of analyzed it at the time, and I don't think it had much impact. And there's probably been mistakes, cheating, etc., all over the place. Also, perhaps the written rules, as I interpret them, are nothing like what the designer has in mind. It's really hard to tell that. But okay, that's the end for this one, and we're going to send this up. And fortunately or unfortunately, I haven't had a chance to read anything small, so I think we're going to be skimming right along into the next turn, and maybe just finishing this sucker up so that I can clean it up, think about when I'm going to play it next, which will probably be far sooner than anyone would reasonably expect. Not on video again. And, you know, there'll just be like this dead zone where maybe I'm doing some rants or maybe some tiny things in between, but I won't be playing anything big. But I got at least one more fairly big game that I want to play. I really ought to do Fall of Rome too. The other Fall of Rome.